began to talk and gesticulate. The teacher at once ran to her, took hold of her arms, and told her to be still. But I, observing the child, saw that she was playing at being teacher or mother to the others, and teaching them the morning prayer, the invocation to the saints, and the sign of the cross. She already showed herself as a director. Another child, who continually made disorganized and misdirected movements, and who was considered abnormal, one day, with an expression of intense attention, set about moving the tables. Instantly they were upon him, to make him stand still, because he had made too much noise. Yet this was one of the first manifestations, in this child, of movements that were coordinated, and directed toward a useful end, and it was, therefore, an action that should have been respected. In fact, after this, the child began to be quiet and happy like the others, whenever he had any small objects to move about and to arrange upon his desk. It often happened that while the directress replaced in the boxes various materials that had been used, a child would draw near, picking up the objects with the evident desire of imitating the teacher. The first impulse was to send the child back to her place with the remark, "Let it alone, go to your seat." Yet the child expressed by this act a desire to be useful. The time, with her, was ripe for a lesson in order. One day the children had gathered themselves, laughing and talking, into a circle about a basin of water containing some floating toys. We had in the school a little boy, barely 2½ years old. He had been left outside the circle, alone, and it was easy to see that he was filled with intense curiosity. I watched him from a distance with great interest. He first drew near to the other children and tried to force his way among them, but he was not strong enough to do this, and then he stood looking about him. The expression of thought on his little face was intensely interesting. I wished that I had had a camera so that I might have photographed him. His eye lighted upon a little chair, and evidently he made up his mind to place it behind the group of children and then to climb up on it. He began to move toward the chair, his face illuminated with hope, but at that moment the teacher seized him brutally, or perhaps she would have said gently, in her arms, and lifting him up above the heads of the other children, showed him the basin of water, saying, "Come, poor little one, you shall see too." Undoubtedly the child, seeing the floating toys, did not experience the joy that he was about to feel through conquering the obstacle with his own force. The sight of those objects could be of no advantage to him, while his intelligent efforts would have developed his inner powers. The teacher hindered the child, in this case, from educating himself, without giving him any compensating good in return. The little fellow had been about to feel himself a conqueror, and he found himself held within two imprisoning arms, impotent. The expression of joy, anxiety, and hope, which had interested me so much, faded from his face, and left on it the stupid expression of the child who knows that others will act for him. When the teachers were weary of my observations, they began to allow the children to do whatever they pleased. I saw children with their feet on the tables, or with their fingers in their noses, and no intervention was made to correct them. I saw others push their companions, and I saw dawn in the faces of these an expression of violence, and not the slightest attention on the part of the teacher. Then I had to intervene, to show with what absolute rigor it is necessary to hinder, and little by little suppress, all those things which we must not do, so that the child may come to discern clearly between good and evil. If discipline is to be lasting, its foundations must be laid in this way, and these first days are the most difficult for the directress. The first idea that the child must acquire, in order to be actively disciplined, is that of the difference between good and evil. And the task of the educator lies in seeing that the child does not confound good with immobility, and evil with activity, as often happens in the case of the old-time discipline. And all this because our aim is to discipline for activity, for work, for good, not for immobility, not for passivity, not for obedience. A room in which all the children move about, usefully, intelligently, and voluntarily, without committing any rough or rude act, would seem to me a classroom very well disciplined indeed. To seat the children in rows, as in the common schools, to assign to each little one a place, and to propose that they shall sit thus quietly, observant of the order of the whole class as an assemblage, this can be attained later, as the starting place of collective education. For also in life it sometimes happens that we must all remain seated and quiet, when, for example, we attend a concert or a lecture. And we know that even to us, as grown people, this costs no little sacrifice. If we can, when we have established individual discipline, arrange the children, sending each one to his own place, in order, trying to make them understand the idea that thus placed they look well, and that it is a good thing to be thus placed in order, that it is a good and pleasing arrangement in the room, this ordered and tranquil adjustment of theirs, then their remaining in their places quiet and silent, is the result of a species of lesson, not an imposition. To make them understand the idea, without calling their attention too forcibly to the practice, to have them assimilate the principle of collective order, that is the important thing. If, after they have understood this idea, they rise, speak, change to another place, they no longer do this without knowing and without thinking, but they do it because they wish to rise, to speak, etc. That is, from that state of repose and order, well understood, they depart in order to undertake some voluntary action, and knowing that there are actions which are prohibited, this will give them a new impulse to remember to discriminate between good and evil. The movements of the children from the state of order become always more coordinated and perfect with the passing of the days. In fact, they learn to reflect upon their own acts. Now, with the idea of order understood by the children, the observation of the way in which the children pass from the first disordered movements to those which are spontaneous and ordered, this is the book of the teacher. This is the book which must inspire her actions. It is the only one in which she must read and study if she is to become a real educator. For the child, with such exercises, makes, to a certain extent, a selection of his own tendencies, which were at first confused in the unconscious disorder of his movements. It is remarkable how clearly individual differences show themselves, if we proceed in this way. The child, conscious and free, reveals himself. There are those who remain quietly in their seats, apathetic or drowsy; others who leave their places to quarrel, to fight, or to overturn the various blocks and toys. And then there are those others who set out to fulfill a definite and determined act, moving a chair to some particular spot and sitting down in it, moving one of the unused tables, and arranging upon it the game they wish to play. Our idea of liberty for the child cannot be the simple concept of liberty we use in the observation of plants, insects, etc. The child, because of the peculiar characteristics of helplessness with which he is born, and because of his qualities as a social individual, is circumscribed by bonds which limit his activity. An educational method that shall have liberty as its basis must intervene to help the child to a conquest of these various obstacles. In other words, his training must be such as shall help him to diminish, in a rational manner, the social bonds which limit his activity. Little by little, as the child grows in such an atmosphere, his spontaneous manifestations will become more clear, with the clearness of truth, revealing his nature. For all these reasons, the first form of educational intervention must tend to lead the child toward independence. Independence. No one can be free unless he is independent. Therefore, the first active manifestations of the child's individual liberty must be so guided that through this activity he may arrive at independence. Little children, from the moment in which they are weaned, are making their way toward independence. What is a weaned child? In reality, it is a child that has become independent of the mother's breast. Instead of this one source of nourishment, he will find various kinds of food. For him the means of existence are multiplied, and he can, to some extent, make a selection of his food, whereas he was at first limited absolutely to one form of nourishment. Nevertheless he is still dependent,